Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. And check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. Hey everybody, welcome to Narativ Live. It's good to be with you, and we're sorry we're a bit late. I'm sorry we're late. This is actual sweat you're seeing on my face from trying to figure out the technical issues that we had. Hello, Eric Garland. How are you doing?
Hello, Zev Shalev. How are you?
I'm really good. It's so nice to see you, because I mean, we've spoken before, but I've never actually had interactions, and here you are. You're Twitter famous, literally. You're one of the people who can be described as a Twitter celebrity.
Somewhere between that and $4 will get you a latte, and a lot of laughs. So,
well, maybe we'll get some tonight. For those people who don't know a lot about you, you describe yourself as a strategic intelligence analyst, which sounds very, very interesting, fascinating, and smart. But why don't you tell us exactly what that means?
So I've been working in the field of strategic and competitive intelligence for over 20 years. Clients have been corporations, governments, and intelligence agencies for...
You froze up on us a little bit, so let me see if that's... going to stick with us. Let's start again on that one. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do, and also how you came up with the game theory.
So my job is doing analysis of huge sets of data about society, technology, economics, politics for leaders of business, government, intelligence agencies and whatnot, and been doing that for over 20 years now, so it's really sticking. And what happened that kind of projected me onto the Twitter sphere was on December 11th, 2016, about 4 days after the intelligence community ordered a full assessment of what just happened with Donald Trump's election and foreign powers. I wrote kind of a Cliff's Note version of what they came up with on 4 days after that, and it caught a lot of attention, good, bad, and indifferent. And ever since then, we've all been trying to make sense of the crazy world that we've inherited with as much fast-paced data as possible, and all these people who had something to give of their own expertise, have been offering it freely. That's become our little community on Twitter, trying to parse through public data and government reports and all that. So we're all just showing up to be citizens of a democracy, and I'm doing my part like everyone else. So.
It's one of the best gifts I think I've ever experienced in journalism is having this this community of people who are just desperately interested in finding the truths, and it's also the largest crowdsourced investigation ever. I think when you really think about the number of people who are involved in trying to get to the truth on the story, and it's remarkable to have everyone pitch it in the way they have. You've done phenomenal work in explaining a lot of this. Tonight we're going to try get some of your skills to look at Michael Flynn. There's a story about Michael Flynn that we all think we know. That's probably the one that's in the main narrative. There's also the story that you can learn about on Fox News. That's a whole other narrative. And then there's somewhere behind all of that, yet another story, which is probably closest to the truth, but it's hard to get at that very easily. So what we're going to do today is try unpack some of this. And the reason why I think it's so important to do this right now is, we've all sort of let Barr get away with a lot of things over the last year. We sort of, we understood that he was covering up on the Mueller report, but it was okay because it wasn't okay, but it was sort of let go by the people. Then we let him do the same with Stone. Now we're doing the same thing with Flynn. And we sort of are getting to a point where rule of law really is being challenged. I mean, at some point, you can't say that you're going to keep politics out of the Department of Justice if you're doing all these actions. And he seems to be continuing to do these actions. Now, I know there was a development today. You pointed out earlier that Shea, the Washington, what would he? Is the attorney for Washington State? For D.C.
He's been the interim United States attorney after Barr got rid of Jesse Liu, and Brandon McGrack, the prosecutor from who's at the National Security Division, who prosecuted Flynn, resigned from the case because Barr was putting in Shea as a replacement to do exactly what he wanted, essentially what looks like obstruction to any honest person. Only 24 to 48 business hours after Judge Sullivan in that case said, "Oh, are you going to come in and try and renegotiate a guilty plea with my court? Okay, well, let's open up amicus briefs. Oh, who do we have on deck? The Watergate prosecutors. Come on in, folks. Is it time for alternative points of view? Well, there's plenty of people with expertise. Let's bring in the Watergate prosecutors. Oh, you know what? I have to take myself out of this. I don't want this to seem biased since you're kind of insinuating that with your nonsense here. Let's get an amicus curiae. Maybe Judge John Gleeson is retired. You remember him from the Eastern District of New York, that would have Brighton Beach and all the Russian mafiosi. Oh, what was his claim to fame as a prosecutor before he became a federal judge? That's right. He took down the Gambinos, Colombos, and John Gotti. Oh, the more the merrier. And 24 hours later, Mr. Shea decides to, I don't know if he's opening a golf shop or is gardening. I don't know what he's doing, but he left the scene pretty quickly.
He thought he should. He was going to lose his job regardless. But still, that is good news for those of us who still believe that there is rule of law and a sign that it is still functioning effectively. So today, let's go through what happened. November 8th, let's start there and go step by step as we look at what Michael Flynn did during this whole process. Now, November 8th was the election. 2 days later, Obama warns Donald Trump that it's not a good idea to hire Michael Flynn. He had concerns about him. He had issues with him. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about what Michael Flynn and Obama broke up over?
Well, first, to get the full context of what's happened with Michael Flynn becoming an unregistered foreign agent for hostile powers after being at the head of one of our defense intelligence agencies. It's really without any form of precedent in terms of the people who take the oath to the Constitution of the United States. Michael Flynn had a 33-year career in intelligence beginning, I believe, in 1982. And he had many senior positions wherever he was at, not just doing analytical intelligence in the back room somewhere, but operationalizing it in the combat theater. He's a man with 3 master's degrees, and he worked up the chain to one of the highest positions possible. And somebody else who had that job before he did was James Clapper, who's had a 55-year career in intelligence and became director of national intelligence. That's the kind of the rarefied air where Mike Flynn was. And, some of the backstory that precedes him becoming friendly with Russia, too friendly, and as we now know, very open to working with other governments other than the United States. You have this illustrious career with quite a few intellectual things that he'd given the community in terms of, really advancing the field of making intelligence work on the battlefield to get bad guys and save lives.
Yeah, he did some really good, impressive stuff, didn't he? I mean, at the end of the day, before he turned whatever he turned, he did some decent work out there.
I mean, one of his papers that people in my field would recognize, I think the metaphor they use is ghost hunting, about really rolling intelligence of figuring out where you need to collect from in an urban environment where you might have, insurgents and terrorists, and how do you feed that back into the bigger intelligence loop. In other words, this is a true professional who works with SAME and got the recognition of presidents. And then I think the common story is around the time Stanley McChrystal, his mentor, or at least a very close colleague of his, was dismissed summarily by Obama following a very unflattering piece in Rolling Stone about the leadership over in Afghanistan, in which I believe McChrystal was quoted being very harsh in his criticisms of the president. And in the United States,
he wasn't alone at the time, and there were a lot of people criticizing the president at that time. Not only
but when you're of course not, but when any president, but when you're a general officer, we have the principle of civilian leadership, and so people who are high-level officers, and even anybody enlisted or officer class, they're not going to comment on politics because we are not Myanmar, we are not North Korea, and we have civilian control of the military. So everyone knows, they're trained, you do not speak in public about your political opinion. That happened. McChrystal was dismissed, and Flynn apparently was very incensed by this, and that set him on quite a path. And he actually became director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's direct intelligence agency that has responsibility for assessing the kinetic, particularly capabilities, i.e., what they can blow up and hit us with.
Why did Flynn get so upset about what happened to McChrystal?
I mean, I think if you had somebody who was a close colleague, if not mentor or friend, who you felt got a raw deal, you might be very angry with what happened to that person. I don't know enough about their personal relationship, and I don't have a comment on whether anybody was justified. But you can see that these are just people, and if somebody that you worked with and you felt deserved more than just a summary dismissal.
Right.
You might become very angry, and apparently he became more radical over time and got really into a very partisan worldview. In this case, right wing. As an intelligence professional myself, I just see the extremes of politics in terms of the horseshoe, which is Russian military science for getting people in a single culture to argue as if they're not citizens all in the same republic. Right. That they love that part. They love to do that, and that's why they put the extreme left in and the extreme right in multiple countries for a century. So I don't care which side you go down. If you're going down a side and not looking critically, particularly if you are in the business of intelligence and you are taught that this is how this works, to get super partisan is kind of considered an analytical weakness. I saw it, my time in DC for 20 years, I saw starting in the late 90s, it was being partisan in the government, much less in the intelligence world, was really considered gauche. It was like, do you really believe the puppet show? Do you not get it? Like, especially if anybody had clearance and knew secret things, it's like every story, every narrative that you ran into was not like it was on the news. You were seeing behind the curtain. You were seeing what the real mechanism was, and you even understood why that needed to be compartmented, because if such a thing was broadly known, there could be major damage either to United States interests or allied interests, or just in general, people could get hurt. Or mostly one of the reasons that we handle these things with such care is you don't know how important something is. And so that's why when you have a job like this, you really treat it with a lot of respect in terms of what information you let out, who you talk to. And Mike Flynn, we end up, when we come into this story November 8th, he has really gone out on a real extreme. But there are stories of him bringing very partisan information into his workspace, and even a story, I believe, of him trying to get a consumer-grade internet line put in at the Pentagon, which I think was a very confusing order, since their IT is really well controlled. And it's like, wait a minute, what do you want? ESPN in here? What's going on? So
somehow he turned, but we don't know how he turned. We just know that he got somehow infected by the wrong kind of information, or something made him believe that the United States was on the wrong path.
Yeah, more than that, I think I led to the inspectors general and the FBI and others to assess. Right. He started going off, I think, around the time he was dismissed by President Obama and he retired. And then after that, that's when he started doing the really unthinkable things, like going and making plans with hostile foreign intelligence services. And, just for the viewers' sake, understand that if you just have a regular security clearance, you are very, very careful about every part of your personal life, every part of how you comport yourself in public, everything down to your finances, your appearance at casinos, your social life to a degree. They're looking to make sure that you don't have something that can be a source of compromise and that could be used to turn you by agents that live in our various allied nations and the United States here, with the express intent of finding somebody that might, that might become compromised. So that's just the average person is making sure that they don't spend.
Your appearances matter. Your appearances matter. Your finances matter. These things are important to keep your security clearance. Otherwise, you're easily compromised. So let's turn to this period of time. November 10th, Obama gives a warning to Trump. He obviously ignores that because 8 days later, Trump appoints Flynn his national security advisor. This was enough to set off alarm bells, you would think. I mean, this would be enough to make anybody in the White House go, didn't he just tell you about this last week?
More than that, I mean, the people in the intelligence community, people in my community, in mid-2016, when we saw Mike Flynn, poke his head up, we're like, wait a minute, he's been hanging out over in Russia, and that's an insane situation. If you consider that the standard for the regular person is making sure they don't do too many scratchers tickets, the lottery. He's hanging out with Vladimir Putin. Where did he come from? Where did we get any of these clowns? And this guy is dangerous. And then when it was announced, oh yeah, he's going to be national security advisor, it was like, what? And that is a very bad thing.
And the president of the United States, the then sitting president of the United States, was right to be concerned about, this potential Putin plant in the executive branch, and raised it with the incoming president, who should have been equally as concerned about someone like that in his administration, you would think.
Agreed. You would think.
But over on the Fox narrative, when you look at their newscasts every night, you'd think that something untoward was being done by just trying to secure the country against this national security threat.
Oh, well, he was just, if you take that story that they're trying to push, this could happen to anyone. Yeah. Really? Everyone has a 33-year career in intelligence and made it to the top of one of 17 agencies? Okay. He was just sitting there, talking to the Russian ambassador about, don't worry about those sanctions. We'll take care of those in a few weeks, as one does. I mean, who hasn't interfaced with the sitting ambassador of our historic, counterintelligence adversary? I mean, who doesn't call them at Christmas on vacation and talk sanctions?
Exactly. So there's absolutely no rational reason for anyone to be saying that Obama was out of his out of scope here. And really what he did at the end of the day was just ask people to be very conscious, as far as we know so far, of what they're sharing with the incoming administration, right? That was about as maybe there was more than that. That was some of what the Fox News people are upset about.
They just released an unclassified, or I should say declassified, email from Susan Rice, who is the outgoing national security advisor, and it is a memo of some discussions inside the executive branch with James Comey saying, yeah, we have some major reservations that include what can we share with these folks. That is the most conservative, gentle way I could imagine it being put, because, everyone's hair was on fire. Our hair was on fire outside of the Situation Room. But, at the end of the day, you have a guy who they know is on the payroll of hostile foreign powers.
Had already been given money. It was paid $50,000 just to go and sit next to Putin. So God knows what else he's getting. Okay, let's go back to this timeline here then briefly. So we're on to December the 1st, although I'm going to fill in some blanks in here. But the next big timeline dot is December the 1st. So Kushner and Flynn meet Kislyak at Trump Tower. This is a meeting we don't hear about until much later on. But then it turns out that they did meet. I think Kushner denied that he had the meeting. He said I asked if they had an existing communications channel at his embassy we could use. This is that meeting. This is the meeting when he asked about, can I have a back channel? Is that possible? So treasonous, really, to be doing that, I would think at that time. Possibly, maybe not treasonous. You'll tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, it doesn't look very good. There is really no... first of all, Kislyak apparently came in like the side elevator, so he avoided the hullabaloo of walking in the front door. And, understand that just generally when a new administration comes in, they're in Washington, they're given office space and the transition. And, eventually the Trump people started making their way down there, but they started out hanging out at Trump Tower almost as if they didn't really expect to win and didn't know how anything should work. And I was calling people, this is how I kind of ended up with my view by December 11th, 2016, talking to people going, how's it going down there? Oh, they're holed up in Trump Tower. What do you mean? They didn't go to the Pentagon. They didn't go to the State Department to make their diplomatic calls in order to our allies. It's like, nope. It's like, wow, okay. No, they're just hanging out at Trump Tower taking like random meetings. And there you've got Al Gore and I think Kanye West or whatever. It was a real zoo. But in the side door comes the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, and we now have, I believe, some FBI 302s that have been declassified, as well as House Intelligence Committee transcripts. And yeah, you see Jared Kushner very breezily explaining, yeah, well, we were, Sergei came by, and I mean, who wouldn't want to be friendly? Well, okay, you guys there's a difference between like saying hi and when you've known each other before perhaps, but talking specific policy is a no-no because there's already an administration in place. But having secret meetings with the Russian ambassador and then saying, can we use secure Kremlin communications so we can back channel to Putin, which I believe everybody says Kislyak wisely was like, no, you're insane.
Yeah.
Of course you can't do that.
That's not a good look.
No, I mean, there's no good reason for it at all.
Let's talk about Jared Kushner here a little bit, because Jared's an unelected official. Here he is meeting with an ambassador from an enemy state, and he's also going to land up having this incredible portfolio that includes all these other big projects that he has, and he has no experience whatsoever. And here he is with really the only other people in the room at the time. I think it was Flynn and that was it, just the two of them. So that's a very dangerous meeting to be had. Someone who has no experience in the world of a government, and then someone who's probably compromised by the Russians.
Yes, not a good thing.
Yeah.
And you can tell by what they were discussing and how they were discussing it. Yes, you have Flynn, who I'll be charitable and say I think his worldview really got ahead of him. Sometimes when we are not thinking clearly, we can get ourselves in more danger than we understand. Mm-hmm. And Kushner, for his part, is a man that understood to his degree the world of New York metro real estate with the money coming from outside. Mm-hmm. But anybody who spends time in DC tells you or can tell you that humility is really important. And there's a process when you get to Washington, you start forming up some opinions about how this works and that works. And the seniors, both men and women, will smack you down and demonstrate for you in the most stark terms in ways that hopefully, if you're going to stick around, you'll learn quickly just how little you know and just how dangerous you are if you go off on your own knowledge, which isn't very much. And it teaches you a hierarchy and to be curious. And Mr. Kushner didn't and still doesn't appear to have much of that. So he's like, sure, we'll just meet with people, we do a deal. It's like, man, everything you do now is under a microscope and being recorded. So this is not, we went out to Joey's, they've got great ossobuco. We met with the guy and he's got another guy that's from the United Arab Emirates. He's going to chuck in, he's got like $100 million for the fund. We're good. And we'll get that bada bing, bada boom, Jersey style. That's not this, man. No.
So we
are now official.
Now he does have some government experience that he knows Bibi Netanyahu quite well. I mean, really well. Other than the sleepovers at the Kushner's household was one thing, but beyond that, they seem to have been pretty close over a long period of time, which should have added another sort of red flag to the situation, you would think.
Yes, being either the intelligence target of or asset of a foreign government, friendly or not, I guess that's one form of government experience. It's not the same thing as rising to the SES senior executive service level at the U.S. government, but it is certainly important. And I think, if we didn't have some curiosity around this before, the fact that we now have Rod Rosenstein's declassified memo saying what Robert S. Mueller III was allowed to look at from DOJ's perspective in the beginning of the Mueller investigation, that it involved George Papadopoulos not merely kicking around London looking for Russians to meet on behalf of Trump, but specifically the question, was he an agent of Israel? And that was one of the first times I've seen something tied to what has become colloquially known as Trump Russia, say, And tell us about Israeli agents.
Well,
And
it's interesting because in the Mueller report, Mueller does actually say that they investigated Papadopoulos for being an Israeli agent. They don't reach a conclusion, but just the fact that they included it as a possibility is enough of an indication they were taking it seriously. Then you've got George Nader, who a lot of people seem to associate him with the UAE and MBZ, but he's also got a history with Netanyahu as well, back to his early days as Israeli prime minister the first time round. And Nader has been an emissary for him for a very long time. You add the Epstein thing on top of all of this, and now you've got potentially quite a few agents running around this Trump-Russia operation that belong to Israel.
Indeed.
And that's an interesting parallel as well with Flynn and Epstein, just to pose something here at the start of the blue. And then we've seen Epstein, who's an Israeli agent. He's not getting prosecuted posthumously or before that. And now Flynn looks like he's getting off. And I'm not saying Flynn is an agent of anyone other than, he's an agent of Israel. But there's a sense that Barr is letting some people off the hook who might be otherwise associated with foreign governments and foreign intelligence.
I'd say offhand, Barr looks like he is increasingly arduous in his attempt to cover up as much information as possible about people with connections to foreign governments and a certain, I'm not going to say the Israeli government because it's a free democracy, and they certainly have enough elections these days. You never know who they could vote in next, but the Bibi Netanyahu administration / regime, that there is, look, when you see Harvey Weinstein using Israeli, either, ex-Israeli Defense Forces operatives on Black U.S. soil. Yeah. That's a very serious thing. I think for the folks that are watching this program right now, understand that, we have links with other countries when it comes to intelligence, but especially with our allied friends, there is really an understanding that listening on anyone's soil can be a good thing, as in they could be catching things on our home soil we might not catch. So if you're listening, even as an ally, that's not considered the worst thing in the world. But kinetic operations, people moving around in the black of night, or what's known as black ops, when you're, like, say, kidnapping someone, like Mike Flynn was promising to do on behalf of Turkey, or what Black Cube was doing, apparently intimidating actresses into not talking about what they knew about Harvey Weinstein and his associates. That's a very serious diplomatic breach right there. And normally that would be accompanied by summoning an ambassador, the revelation that, wait a minute, you have operatives on our soil harassing U.S. persons or U.S. citizens. Come here, we want to talk to you. That is a big deal. And, that, I think, if we were more articulate about that in bigger, mainstream media sources, maybe people would have gotten a sense of, wow, we have a lot of questions to ask about what Israel is doing here, because we find out Black Cube had office space that was like in IDF government real estate. Like, they're not so very different, because we all have mercenaries. I mean, for thousands of years, you have soldiers that go off and do a thing for money later, but being under the auspices of a government is very complicated. So we've had that now, and we've known about that for years. But now I think what you're seeing with the revelations and the different documents being declassified, we now have not just a lot of questions about Russia, many of which are answered, but we have a whole lot about Israel, many of which are not answered.
Right. And I think there's, if there's been I don't know if it's an attempt, because it certainly doesn't feel coordinated. There's just sort of a sensitivity around how much Israel criticism you can put out there. Because if you do, it tends to inflame sort of anti-Semitic responses in whatever communities that, those things tend to show up. So there's a sensitivity around, can we put this in the media? But maybe too much sensitivity, because we've left so much out of the narrative that you start looking at it and you're saying, well, there's just too many holes here. Where does can you exclude the fact that Joel Zammel came to meet with Don Trump Jr. in August 9th in Trump Tower and discussed social manipulation of the American public during the election? Can you just leave that out and say, well, that's not Israel, that's MBS and MBZ? It's not Israel. It's impossible to do that because Zamel worked, came out of the IDF, came out of that grouping within the IDF that did all this high-tech surveillance and manipulation. So that seems to be like an operation that came out of the IDF, or certainly an allied private organization. And as we continue to go through, it's interesting to see where we could find some other interesting places where Israel might have come up. So speaking of which, here's the UN resolution. It's December the 22nd, and multiple members, this is reading from Mueller here, multiple members of the transition team, as well as President-elect Trump, communicated with foreign government officials to determine their views on the resolution and to rally support to delay the vote to defeat the resolution. Kushner led the effort for the transition team. Flynn was responsible for the Russian government. Minutes after an early morning phone call with Kushner on December the 22nd, Flynn called Kislyak. According to Flynn, he informed Kislyak about the vote and the transition team's opposition to the resolution and requested that Russia vote against or delay the resolution. Later that day, President-elect Trump spoke with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi about the vote. Ultimately, Egypt postponed the vote for a day or two, I think it was. But this is probably the cornerstone of the Flynn investigation. It comes right down to two things that he did. He spoke to Kislyak about sanctions, but he also initially spoke to Kislyak about this resolution, which was going before the United Nations. Obama had agreed to let the vote go ahead. And this, of course, upset Bibi Netanyahu tremendously. Bibi and Obama had never gotten along well. This was viewed by the Bibi government as a bit of a stab in the back as he was leaving office by Obama. Might have in fact been a little, you haven't helped me very much. Here's what you can get. But so they had a vote ultimately, and the vote went through. But this intervention of first Kushner, then Flynn to intervene while there was a sitting president is in fact illegal.
Yes.
And so tell us,
illegal.
It's illegal because of the Logan Act.
It is, and which has been, not prosecuted very much or at all, but also we've had a lot of things during the Trump era that have been mostly kept together by tradition, as in, yes, there are laws in the books, or maybe there aren't, but these things take care of themselves because they would be so on their face bad and wrong that we haven't had to worry about it. So the notion of there being one president at a time and us having, for example, a lot of pomp and circumstance about turning over the power of the White House peacefully, with it the nuclear launch codes and the world's most powerful military. We go to great pains to go, this person's in power, now this person's in power. And they meet with their spouses and there's handshakes. There's not, a paramilitary group that seizes the radio station and says, we're declaring it's year zero of this new republic. That's not what we do. So one president at a time, and that is legally sealed by the Logan Act, but I don't believe it had ever been tested. But this time it got tested because Flynn and Kushner did not wait, and they started conducting foreign policy on their own while there was already a group of Americans duly elected and already sworn in that were conducting their own foreign policy. So it was
completely contradictory. I mean, they were doing different things against each other. This was not just them, freelancing on something that the Obama administration was not working on. This was something.
And only one side was teamed up with the Russians, going, "What do you guys want? What do you need?"
Right, and would you please? So, and teamed up with Israel, actually. Well, I should say more accurately, teamed up with Bibi Netanyahu, because the request came from Bibi Netanyahu to stop this vote or move it along. It was their interests that Trump and Kushner and Flynn were protecting when they decided to intervene, before being elected or before being sworn in. So that's a significant. It's not just Russia; it's Israel that was doing that.
And what I also find interesting from that clip that you just put up, the quote
Mm.
from the Mueller report,
Mm.
is how the linchpin was Egypt. And
Right.
Trump talked to Egypt. I just got done looking at thousands of pages of the House Intelligence Committee transcripts that were declassified. And I thought that the Simona Mangiante transcripts would be kind of light and not that substantive, 40, 50 pages compared to everyone else's 250. No, hers was 222 pages about what her either soon-to-be husband or recently betrothed George Papadopoulos was up to in Europe. And she was very articulate about the fact that, he was there to get connections going between Trump and Putin, maybe a meeting, like he had with al-Sisi in Egypt. He'd already done that, and now he's there to complete the loop there. So you've got this very, very complicated set of alliances there that are not evident to the average person just from reading the news. So you have some people that are very, very friendly with Russia, if not Russian money at least. Then you have, Jared Kushner's noted connections to Bibi Netanyahu. So you have some working alongside Israel there, but you also have an Egypt connection, and they're all working together to delay a vote in the United Nations. Only one group of these people are about to inherit the White House from the other group that already has the White House and is trying to conduct U.S. foreign policy without the no doubt well-meaning help of the Russian Federation in making those decisions. So it's kind of sticky.
It's very sticky, and this is what it comes down to. Barr isn't saying he's dismissing all of this. When you look at what Mueller was doing, he farmed out 14 big cases, right, to various jurisdictions around the country, and one by one, Barr has gone through these and stopped them or removed them. Excuse me. So you've got a situation now that Barr is sort of whitewashing a really big part of American history and a really big crime against the American Constitution.
And it's really, really obvious that he's doing it.
Yeah, it is. You're very out of sync, and I can't tell if that's something that I'm only witnessing or whether other people can see. But if you are at home, and I'm sorry about that, we'll hopefully try to fix it in editing for the podcast. But you look great, so that's good, Eric.
Hopefully, me from 2 seconds ago is still sounds semi-intelligent and looks, yeah. We've all been in quarantine here. I'm growing out my hair for 1980s hair metal videos in a couple of years. So
I've got my quarantine too as well. Actually, yours looks very nice. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I like the way it looks on you. All right, so let's keep going here. We are now in December 22nd. The vote goes ahead on December 23rd. And then the next thing we know, on December 28th, Obama introduces new sanctions against Russia. Now, this is the second big event that sort of has been triggered the FBI investigation or made them at least go in and question Flynn. Tell us more about what we know about the second event, which is Obama instituting these sanctions and then Flynn's reaction.
So Russia interfering in democracies in the West is not new to the point of it's 100 years old. They've been, A/B testing and deploying techniques and technologies, since the Russian Revolution to some degree on their Western adversaries. So this was not new, but what was new, and every level of the intelligence community has concluded this, was the scale, the scope, the breadth, and the naked aggression of Russia and its constituent partners in this effort, which looks like it includes at least Israel as well. That nobody's attacked our democracies this hard with propaganda and paid agents ever before. They have had these things in place before and maybe had demonstrable effects, but never so brazenly and so intensely. I know many analysts that conclude that once Obama and Robert S. Mueller III declared war on transnational organized crime, starting with the Russian Voryzakone, Russian Red Mafia, and all its partners around the world, and started shutting its banking down, especially when they started shutting it down hard with the Magnitsky Act in 2013, that you have this lunge for the throat by Russia and some other people that are partnered with Russia, spreading that laundered, crime money around, and that can, involve several nation states. But things got very desperate. And if you look by 2014, Putin is taking increasingly risky, intense moves geopolitically, even though economically and militarily they might not be in a place to do this. It's very Russian for them to test out Barack Obama, who had pretty much tried to have some form of a reset and get the economy under control and whatnot. But in 2014, they invade part of Ukraine and take Crimea and are shooting planes out of the sky. And then 2015, we get Donald Trump, who is in some form of debt to the Russians and others, running for president. And then they put their full weight in. That gets us to November 8th. Everyone's surprised. And I knew from my sources that a lot of interference was deployed on the day of the election, and right around there, things were unveiled that nobody expected anybody to be that brazen, and probably even the people behind it didn't expect it to work. They didn't expect Trump to be president, but surprise, he won, and that caused the intelligence community to leap forward and trying to analyze as much as possible. And they would have, by late December, they knew a lot of, okay, you guys did this, these guys did this, and of course you're going to have multiple FBI investigations, criminal counterintelligence, multiple agencies tracking all sorts of players. But for whether they like it or not, that means that the incoming Trump administration had a lot of eyes on them from a lot of countries. And then, Mike Flynn crosses the line around Christmas when Obama gets enough information. All right, we need to smack these guys back. We need to show our doctrine for national security. You attacked us, and we're going to start here with making persona non grata a great number of your diplomats, parentheses, spies, closing down 2 of your houses, spy centrals, spy headquarters.
Compounds, yeah.
Those are, dachas, if you will. We're taking those, and your 35 guys are PNG. Sorry, going to just revert to the slang.
Yeah.
And normally there will be some form of response in that, and that was done to show an adversary, you're going to pay for this kind of behavior, so let's start here. And this is where Flynn crossed a major line. He called the Russian ambassador and said, don't worry about that. Don't respond.
Yes.
We'll
moderate your response to those sanctions is what he was requesting of Kislev to pass on to Putin. And Putin was moderate. He didn't do anything. He didn't respond. The next day,
then Trump, before he's even president, is tweeting saying, oh, he's very smart, that Putin. I like the cut of his jib.
Yeah.
Just like nobody ever does.
A great move on the delay by V. Putin was the tweet. I've always knew he was very smart. Yeah. So there you go.
Very smart.
I mean, there's nothing it's so undercutting of the current American foreign policy and just the foreign policy for the last 40 or 50 or 70 years that it's kind of astonishing that the incoming president would be so brazen in attacking the outgoing president policy as he was implementing it, and really tells you the kind of strength, I believe, that Russia and its allies, Saudi Arabia and UAE, Israel, were implementing. They felt so strong at this point. They felt like they had enough of a position to do what they were doing, even to ask the incoming administration and their officials to commit a crime.
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't mean it was the smartest move they ever made. But at the time, maybe it seemed like something they could get away with. And this is another test. Like, well, let's see if their deep state, if you will respond to this. Let's see if the national security infrastructure will, arrest Flynn earlier. This is a brand new world. They're going to have one of their agents in the White House.
So you
So
thought
let's figure out what's going on.
this may have been a test by them to sort of to test the boundaries, to see how much they can work with the intelligence community and how much they have to play with in terms of the FBI.
I think everybody involved on our, let's call it our side, their side, any side. I know for myself, I got about 1 hour of sleep per night for about a month. I was, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know? What's going on? I'm pretty sure they were doing the same thing. And if you look at some of the declassified transcripts, I'm seeing that, my colleagues in the SCIFs, in the deep, dungeons of intelligence, they were doing the same thing. Like, what's going on? What's going on? And no, we were in brand new territory. And so it's very typical of Russia to try to make a very aggressive move and see what you do. And they're almost like, I don't want this to be too derogatory, though I'm not too happy with them, but they're like dogs in this manner. It's like they're looking to be the alpha, and they're going to put their paw on yours and see if are you going to flinch? Are you going to make are you going to respond, or are we going to make another move and see if you respond then? That tends to be their stock in trade diplomatically, and certainly in terms of intelligence operations. And so they're just like, my God, they're letting us get away with this. Now, long term, does that work out really well for them? Well, history's not written yet on that. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Obama didn't react, as no drama Obama, as he was known for a good reason. He was not known to react. Well, privately, he was known to have a bit of a temper, but publicly, he would not sort of have these outbursts against provocation that Putin must have expected from him when he first did this. So, in some ways, Obama didn't do very much. You could actually argue from a conservative, right-wing, hawkish perspective that Obama was really weak. He wasn't, but you could argue that. In fact, they're arguing the exact opposite, that he was eavesdropping on the incoming administration and entrapping them. Nothing could be further from the truth than that. There was just normal FBI investigation going on and typical surveillance.
Look, you have the right to privacy as an American citizen. The second you get a security clearance and work in national security, even after you retire, you have a lot less right to it. And once you join a presidential administration, you can kiss it for the most part goodbye. But let's just take you as a regular citizen in the United States. You do have the right to privacy. You do not have the right to form conspiracies with hostile foreign intelligence services. That's not one of your guaranteed constitutional rights. And trying to exercise it is a good way to get yourself on some form of FBI surveillance. Sorry, and it's insane to me that there are people trying to sell this to cover up for the fact that essentially there were a bunch of traitors here who were selling out their country.
Right. And they must have known. I mean, how can someone like Flynn, or as you were saying earlier, anybody of these people have not known they were under surveillance? It seems kind of bizarre that they wouldn't think they were under surveillance.
Well, especially when you learn that the Flynn made this phone call to Sergei Kislyak from the Dominican Republic.
Yes, that's right. He then goes off to Punta Cana, right? Which is why at that point you're about to become a major figure in the government. Why are you going to Punta Cana in the first place? What's into the Dominican Republic that he needs to go be there on New Year's Eve of 2016 into 2017? Sorry, that's seems an unusual place to go.
Great place at the time if you wanted to traffic a lot of cocaine, like the Peralta organization that was subsequently indicted. A good place for coke traffickers. If you're into military juntas, there's been reason to go there over the decades. But I remind everyone that even though he was DIA head, I believe Mike Flynn's first assignments in his first duties in the U.S. Army was doing signals intelligence. So anybody who's the head of an intelligence agency understands that if you're using consumer grade electronics, even things that you assume to be encrypted to some degree or another, you have to assume that there are players out there that can pick them up. But certainly anyone serious in intel knows that if you're using your own cell phone, even in a country like the United States where you have constitutional protections, whereas in France, good luck, you don't. They will intercept whatever they want, and if they think it's useful for national security, they'll listen to it, use it, whatever. But even then, if you're in the intelligence world, if you're talking to the Russian ambassador on a phone, that is being recorded by someone or lots of someone.
It should be.
And if you're in the Dominican Republic, that is not NATO, that is not a Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance nation, you're talking about Nigerian intelligence getting a copy. You're, Belizean intelligence, whoever. You're not being careful at all. And the fact that you're there hanging out while you're waiting to be head of the National Security Council, I mean, there's just so many things wrong on so many levels.
I really would like to know who he was seeing there. I mean, there must have been someone to have gone all the way there. There must have been someone he was meeting with. They certainly like these island destinations to go off and do their secret meetings, or they seem to have during that period. It would seem amazing to me if he was just going there on a typical vacation, but who knows? Maybe he was. So let's take a look at the January time period. So now we get to January 12th, and Washington Post reveals that Flynn and Kislyak had that call, and they reveal what happened there. And then on January 15, Pence is on TV, and he denies that Flynn spoke to him. So this is the core of that conversation. We had basically the reason why Flynn was fired was because he lied to Pence about his conversations with Kislyak. That's the brunt of of why Trump decided to fire Flynn. That's correct, right?
That's their story. That's right. So, Pence, who was apparently picked by Paul Manafort, who is a straight up agent for the Russian Federation and the Russian mob, picks out Pence. And, they have transition emails from that period of time where I believe it's Katie McFarland says, with regards to those sanctions, well, the only reason that Obama's putting those sanctions on Russia is because Russia gave us the win in the election. And if you have, very little in terms of privacy, once you're on incoming into an administration to begin with, they were using transition emails that provided to them by the General Services Administration. That's the government agency in charge of physical infrastructure, everything down to coffee creamer and staplers and stuff like that. They set them up their temporary offices. So they're already part of the government. And they're like, yeah, Russia gave us the win. And when Mueller wanted to pick that information up to find out what they were talking about during the transition, he didn't need a subpoena. Our taxpayer dollars already bought that. So he just picked up the phone and said, hey, can you send me those? And whoop, right over to Bob Mueller's office.
Oh, that's interesting.
and they had December 2017. I mean, I was in Manhattan, oddly enough, and I remember checking my phone and just being dumb and mute and like leaning on a building. Just, you're kidding me that these guys they were on on their government email, like, oh yeah, the only reason they're being mean to those Russians is because they gave us the election. These are inside voices, kids. If we are conspiring with Russia, we do not say so out loud.
Right. Well, it seems to be the Trump MO. Just say whatever you did and expect it to go away just because you've said it out loud.
Indeed, and sometimes that is just yet one more exhibit for the prosecutors at court.
Right.
So,
if he ever gets there. Now, I want to show you a couple of things that I don't think people are very aware of. Firstly, there's a couple of meetings that Flynn attended that happened sort of in another narrative, which was sort of the Seychelles, Israel, Iran narrative that aren't really gelled into with this particular timeline. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed. So there's two meetings. One happened in December. I'm not sure if this is the same one. I don't think it is the same one. It's MBZ flies into New York. He meets with Bannon, Flynn, and Jared Kushner. MBZ is the crown prince of the UAE. And he's there to discuss, potentially Iran and their Iran strategy going forward. And that happened somewhere in December, right? Somewhere in the first few weeks of December. So I'll put that other timeline back up in a second, and we'll see where it fits in. And then in January, which is the time period we're now talking about, George Nader, who's potentially also an Israeli asset, but he's definitely working for the UAE and Saudi Arabia. He is in New York City, and he meets with Flynn, Bannon, Zamel, the Israeli social media guy, and Asari, who's the Saudi guy, on Iran. That, this is all happening while there is a giant conversation and investigation going on about whether Flynn is actually compromised by the Russians. And so this is an incredible. This is not changing for me. Let me just change here and see what's going on with my screen. Let me try this. Okay.
You could leave it up for a while. That is a hell of a timeline. I mean, the people that they were working with, all the while not having made the regular diplomatic calls to our allies in order. The United Kingdom, the special relationship, Australia, our most reliable military partner, Canada, our biggest trade partner, and down the line. They hadn't done that, but they're hanging out with MBZ and these kind of rogue Israeli elements in New York and elsewhere, and talking Iran policy. And it just happens to be folks that are involved with laundering a whole lot of Iranian money. It's just really remarkable, set of priorities between being elected kind of by accident and taking over the most important jobs of anybody's lifetime. They were really busy meeting with people that had a completely different plan for the future of the world.
They really did. I mean, it looks to me like they basically were trying to sort of rearrange the world in the way they wanted to. And the way, you've got a series of events there. If you look at them, it's all these world leaders sending their representatives to the Seychelles, but having pre-meetings and post-meetings with actual things that came out of that Seychelles meeting. So even though Eric Princeton initially described the Seychelles meeting as, bumping into someone in a bar, it was much, much more than that. It was the centerpiece of a series of events and series of meetings that took place, which involved changing the balance of power in the world.
They were talking about transferring United States nuclear technology to the Middle East. They were, and let's just cut to the chase here. What was going on here was there was a global conspiracy to change the geostrategigic center of the world to Eurasia, a partnership between Russia, China, the Gulf states, Iran to a degree, and that they were going to throw off the chains of the United States and NATO and the post-World War II era, and they were going to be in charge. Gosh darn it. I think they were headed for the year 2020 was when they wanted the real shift in the United States. And again, just cut and paste. The story's got to come out at some point. Their plan was for a Hillary Clinton presidency to go extremely poorly, for there to be violence on U.S. soil, and to show that the American experiment had run its course.
You've just frozen on me. Come back to me, because I've been really.
I'm still moving.
Oh, good. You're
promise.
You're back. You're
yes.
back. Okay, I can hear you.
Yeah. This is like ventriloquism, but in reverse.
It's funny.
So the lips are moving, but there was a nefarious plan here, and people it started, I think, about 4 years earlier, getting somebody like Trump in power, and they didn't really have a plan for somebody who was so obviously diseased in so many ways, metaphorical and otherwise, to take power. And I remember talking to people in those months and going, who is going to work with this guy that knows anything? And then the answer came back, nobody. And so this is when you get Ben Carson, who came out and said, I do not belong in a cabinet position. And then 2 days later, he's taking a cabinet position. It was just so strange, but it makes sense in retrospect that, people got wind of this, unless there was already compromising photos of you and farm animals somewhere, you were going to avoid these people. But there were some out there who couldn't, and people cashed in their chips, and with those assets. But this was in furtherance of a bigger scheme to to damage America and to make it no longer the leader of the world, and to have these authoritarian regimes buttressed by technology and propaganda and fueled by fossil fuel energy, economically and otherwise, that they were going to run the world, and we were not. And I think they got the go-ahead a few years too early with people that did not really have the skills for it. So they just went for it. And they're like, okay, let's meet at Trump Tower and see how it goes. Well, how it went was, look, when MBZ flies into the United States without checking in through the State Department, we still know where that plane's coming from. You can't just sneak into our country as a dignitary and think we're not going to know, and yet they did this. Yeah. And you have these people that, again, going back to some of what I was saying at the beginning of the program about if you have a security clearance, you're worried about too many nights at the bingo hall, and we went on vacation to Mexico. Oh, did I take some margarita glasses as a gift? That is so far below what these guys are doing, just openly meeting with hostile intelligence services that are under investigation by a number of players. It's just so reckless. My phrase I use is, you can see it from space. Right. This is not well hidden.
But from your perspective, this is them just sort of gunning it because they were hoping to have another 4 more years. They basically were making it up as they went along.
And at some point, you've committed crimes that are so horrific that your end is not going to be very good. I think everybody in this drama right now who's been on the wrong side of history, they have to continue on with their treason, or they will get the business end of somebody's nasty intelligence operative, or get Russian window cancer, or spend life in prison. So they're doing whatever they can now, and this is where I get a lot of Bill Barr's actions that I just interpret as flailing and just trying to, what's going on with Flynn. It's like he's Christopher Reeve in Superman 2 trying to fly around the planet backwards to unindict and uninvestigate Flynn, and file all this, this complete insane garbage in the District of DC Court, which is not a place to mess around. You don't have the right to go through with the deal you made with this guy. It's like, no, you can't drop charges that were never brought. Flynn signed a contract with Judge to say, yes, don't charge me with treason, and I will make life easy for you. I will proffer what I know, and I will do. He was looking at a single 18 U.S. Code 1001 charge. That's a max of 6 months and a few bucks of fine. First time nonviolent offender, you're looking at a couple of weeks picking up garbage in minimum security prison. Frankly, less unpleasant than spending all summer cooped inside, due to COVID-19. You could get on with your life after that. And yet they're moving heaven and earth to try and unindict him. And I think there's a lot of people going, well, wait, isn't there a pardon coming? And you can look back at the FBI 302s that released a couple months back, which I went through page by page, 600 pages of them. And you've got texts between Manafort and Rick Gates where they're saying, or where Manafort's like, hold on, pardon's coming, Trump will take care of us. Whereas, well, no, you're co-conspirators and you'll have to allocute to your guilt. And if you're guilty for treason, then in getting Trump elected, then he's guilty too. So that's not showing up. And there's all these people who, once they start confessing and proffering so that they do not spend the rest of life in the penitentiary, that they will be giving away. It's like a chain reaction. And I think that's why William Barr is doing things that no third-year law student would consider. One with a really bad crank habit and no sense at all would avoid this stuff.
So what you're saying is that the pardons are not going to work in this case, ultimately, that there's too much, that you can't pardon a co-conspirator, is what I think you're saying. And you've got now these these court cases that still need to go on. The only way to achieve what Barr wants is to have complete withdrawal of these charges. They have to disappear. But the problem is, there's all these other crimes that these guys allegedly committed. Not allegedly, because they haven't been charged, but there's the emails thing where they were trying to get these emails from various people. Someone died in Chicago, and they were hunting. So there could possibly be a murder or manslaughter involved in there. You've got the UN resolution, which was the Logan Act. That's just two off the top of my head. There's probably several other charges that are pending. You can't just wipe them all clean. What about Mike Flynn's son?
Yes,
he was also under investigation, and what happens to him? Because I think Flynn agreed to the deal because he didn't want his son prosecuted.
That was the rumor, and the thing about conspiracy charges is that the statute of limitation only kicks in once there has been a last act in furtherance of a conspiracy, and if the conspiracy is accessory to a crime after the fact, or conspiracy to defraud the United States of America, if you keep doing that by obstructing justice, by spreading hostile Russian propaganda, you're still committing crimes. And it's so funny, they went out on this limb, the certain media properties and people trying to defend Donald Trump, saying that Mike Flynn was unmasked and that this is this horrible thing. First of all, I'd just like to say, I know for a fact I have been unmasked before. I'm not going to go into why, but that there are lots of different foreign operators floating around, and if you've ever been on the phone with one and something came up, you've probably been identified as, oh, okay, who's that guy he's talking to? Well, it's not the end of the world if you're not conspiring to try and take over U.S. foreign policy for dictators. It's no big deal. But on top, so these things happen all the time when just an intelligence or national security executive of some form says, "Oh, I need this. I need this unmasked." Who are they talking to there? Because that seems important. Like, for example, we know because Mr. Rick Grinnell, the acting with a heavy acting, doing a lot of work in this sense. The acting DNI, declassifying who got Flynn unmasked at that time, and they're like, okay, here's the list, and one of them is Samantha Power, who was UN ambassador, and it makes complete reasonable request. Wait a minute, somebody's conspiring against me with 3 other countries. Well, who is it?
Yeah.
And it turns out it's Mike Flynn. And but that the call that was apparently leaked out was not from the unmasking, which makes sense because leaking defense information is a very serious felony. I don't think this is any less serious. But when it was revealed, no, that came from a Title III surveillance warrant, a criminal issue, not counterintelligence, that Mike Flynn was already under criminal investigation in addition to counterintelligence. And that is the kind of thing that they were trying to tell Mr. Trump. Hey, your boy Mike Flynn there has maybe a bit of a complicated backstory. But of course, so maybe he's...
For Donald Trump, he's like, everyone around here has got a complicated backstory. It's how you get to be part of my team. So,
well, that's right. They select for that. So this is why it was such a unique moment for everyone. Like, oh my God, he doesn't care that this guy is, compromised in terms of criminal investigations. They're like, that's this whole crew. That's my family. That's my family for multiple generations. We're mobsters.
This is what
we're
we
like
do.
That.
Meet the family. So you've got, Mike Flynn was also the vice chair of the transition committee. You've got Kushner, who ended up being the head of the transition committee before the inauguration. Let me think about that. Sorry, it was Pence who was first the chairman of the inauguration of the transition committee, and then Flynn was the vice chair, which means that Flynn was also responsible for hiring all these people, putting all these people in the administration in their jobs. That's a significant position to put someone who you've already been warned has challenges. I want to leave you with one last quote, which I bet you have not seen. I had to verify this. Actually, I had to call Isaac Herzog's office directly to figure out if this was what he said. He denied saying it, but then I checked the transcript, checked the audio. He did say this. This is on election eve. a warning from Isaac Herzog, who was then the labor leader, the opposition leader in the Israeli Knesset. He's speaking about Netanyahu, and he says, recently there have been reports of Israeli leaders interfering in the elections through overseas proxies. I call on Netanyahu to instruct those close to him to make sure no damage is done. Direct quote, I've checked the transcripts, checked with his office, 100% what he said. He wouldn't allow me to interview him, although I did have a conversation with him. This is really happened. It's underreported, but it certainly seems like in Israel, there was awareness, at least on election eve, that something was just happening. Something really bad was happening.
They were talking about the American election, or not Israeli Knesset elections. They were talking about that there's some Israeli. Okay.
The night before the American elections, they were saying, we've heard Netanyahu's up to some no good here with his allies and through his proxies. He shouldn't do this because we've been through this before with the United States. It didn't work out well for us. So, I think referring to Pollard. So, a clear warning from inside that this was happening before any of us knew it was happening. Because for us, it was still Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia.
I think that, at a certain level, a lot of countries with serious intelligence services have not the same but similar views of, which country is doing what when. And I think, it would have been very obvious to anyone with, good access to intelligence who was doing what and maybe even why. And I can see from an Israeli perspective, because, our country is diverse, Britain is diverse, France is diverse, that Israel has different factions. And it sounds like Mr. Herzog was making comment like, if we go through with what's about to happen, there's going to be blowback. And maybe he didn't think of Trump being elected, but merely Israel being, revealed to be, in, active hostile intelligence service land rather than just our complicated allies who, I think people who know Israel and its situation and love its people, its culture, and appreciate its position in the world. You see it as a country that was born in difficulty and complexity and just kind of went from there. And that they always have a difficult balance to strike. However, just because we have a difficult situation doesn't mean we can't make just net mistakes. And attacking the United States' democracy, that's going to be a huge blow to the U.S.-Israeli relationship. I hope, in the same way that I hope that other countries don't hold Donald Trump against the rest of us who want to see this to be a just, democratic, pluralistic country that is a rock-solid leader, not just partner, but a leader for its allies, that they look at the Trump years as a horrible aberration and know that that's not all of America. And I hope that we extend a lot of that to other nations, with plenty of good people that, do see a democratic future and who won't be a bunch of mobsters, essentially.
I mean, absolutely. You'd hope the same thing is extended. And it's maybe this is this misstep by Barr to try and reverse these Flynn allegations will finally put a spotlight into this area of what was Israel's involvement with Russia during that period of time, because it's hard to look at the timeline and not say Israel was there. They were there. So was the UAE. So was MBS. So was that. There's a lot of players involved. It's not just Flynn on one phone call to Kislyak. There's a lot of other things happening. And now with Flynn sort of coming back into the spotlight, a new judge going to look at this. I wonder what he'll have to find once they look at the whole set of circumstances, and whether this idea of Barr to try and backpedal in these charges just maybe backfiring on him at the end of the day.
Well, in public relations, they talk about the Streisand effect, that when there's something that you don't want called to public attention, if you have a lot of power, sometimes the harder you fight it, the more attention you draw to it. And
look at you with the Streisand reference. I like it.
I've got a few original cast recordings around here. What can I do?
I won't tell anyone.
William Barr, you look into it and you find out, wait a minute, who tried to get Barr onto Trump's team once Mueller was appointed was David Friedman, who is the current ambassador to Israel, who was law partners with Mark Kasowitz and was a bankruptcy attorney not only for Trump's casinos, but for a very interesting crew of the last 20 years of Enron and WorldCom, and then Lehman Brothers, and then,
Lehman Brothers. I didn't know that. That's an interesting new one for me. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was, all the greatest hits.
And that conversation between Friedman and Barr happened in Jerusalem, of all places. So Barr went to Jerusalem somewhere in 2016. He went to Jerusalem for, as one does, for a conversation with the ambassador before joining. The original ask was to join the legal team to defend Trump in the impeachment or some other various forms of lawsuits. And Barr wasn't having any of that, but then he ended up being the AG. So here he is.
Well,
now.
He was busy with Caterpillar working for Kirkland and Ellis, which has a lot of Russian ties as a law firm, and things get complicated really quick. Things we wouldn't have known without them calling all of this attention to look at Flynn, look at Barr, look at all these people, and you go, who are you, and what are you doing, and why are you doing it?
Exactly.
And
exactly. So here we are. I had no idea we'd be back in Trump Russia land before the elections, and here we are doing that again. Eric, thank you very much for a great time this evening. Thanks for joining me. It's been terrific. We have to do this again many, many times if you'll come.
Thank you for having me, and let's do it again.
All right, cheers. Have a good night.
Thanks, Zev.
Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.